Good morning. Today we are going to start fourth module, the marginalized and their rights. What is marginalization? Marginalization is to render or treat as marginal, to remove from the center or mainstream, to force an individual minority group to the periphery of a dominant social group, to belittle, depreciate, discount, or dismiss. The term is increasingly replacing and or being associated with other similar terms which you may be more familiar with, such as vulnerable groups, seldom heard groups, or hard to reach groups. Although each is different, all these terms include two main aspects. Firstly, there is a main or dominant or central individual or group exerting power over another individual group with some sort of disadvantage occurring. Example, the government. In other words, the process of marginalization leads to unequal outcomes. Marginalization is a dynamic process and people can move in and out of such groups. Many people can fall into one or more categories or groups simultaneously. Through this module, we are going through the marginalized and their rights. All over the world, people have accepted the notion that all the living beings are entitled to and are empowered for a dignified existence. The human beings demand the realization of diverse values to ensure their individual and collective well-being. However, everywhere these demands or rights are denied through exploitation, oppression, marginalization, persecution, etc. The fourth module on human rights deals with various issues related with the marginalized groups and their rights. Of the 4 chapters in the fourth module, the UN speech by Malala Yousafzai deals with issues related with women education, and also it focuses on the idea of free and compulsory education for every child of the third world countries. Let us start with Malala Yousafzai. Malala Yousafzai was born in Swat Valley, Pakistan in 1997. In 2009, she wrote an anonymous BBC blog about life under the Taliban. Her identity is revealed in TV interviews and a documentary in 2009 to 10. In 2011, she becomes the nominee of International Children's Peace Prize. She was shot in assassination attempt by Taliban in 2012. In 2003, she becomes Nobel Peace Prize nominee, named one of Time magazine's most influential people, still only 16. She has to balance being the world's most high-profile educational campaigner in demand around the world with the completion of her own schooling. Malala Yousafzai was born on July 12, 1997 in Mingora, the largest city in the Swat Valley in what is now the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province of Pakistan. The Swat Valley once took pride in being called the Switzerland of Pakistan. It is very beautiful place in Pakistan. It's a mountainous place, cool in summer and snowy in winter, within easy reach of the capital Islamabad. And when Malala was born in 1997, it was still peaceful. She is the daughter of Ziauddin and Torpekai Yousafzai and has two younger brothers. Historically, the Northwest has been one of Pakistan's least developed regions. But Swat, interestingly, has long been a bright spot in terms of education. We are going to speak about the history of education in Swat Valley. Until 1969, it was a semi-autonomous principality. Its ruler known as the Valley. The first of these was Miangul Gulshazada Sir Abdul Wadud, appointed by a local council in 1915 and known to Swadis as Badshah Sahib, the king. Although himself uneducated, he laid the foundation for a network of schools in the valley. It was the beginning of education in Swat Valley. The first boys' primary school came in 1922, followed within a few years by the first girls' school. The trend was continued by his son, Wali Miangul Abdul Haq Jahan Seb, who came to power in 1949. Within a few months, he had presented the school girls of Swat to the visiting Prime Minister of Pakistan, Liaquat Ali Khan, and his wife Rana. As his grandson Miangul Adnan Aurangzeb says, it would have been unusual anywhere else in the northwest at that time, but in Swat, girls were going to school. So, you should remind one thing, in Swat Valley, without any gender discrimination, they provided education. The new valley's focus soon turned to high schools and colleges, including Jahanseb College, founded in 1952, where Malala's father, Ziauddin Yousafzai, would study many years later. Soon Swat became known across Pakistan for the number of professionals it was producing, especially doctors and teachers. From the history of Swat Valley, I think all of you understand people were blessed to get the proper education in Swat Valley without any gender discrimination. As Adnan Aurangzeb says, Swat was proud of its record on education. One way to identify a Swadi outside of Swat was that he always had a pen in his chest pocket, and that meant he was literate. So we can say that people in valley, they were literate. Against this backdrop, the fate that befell the schools of Swat in the first years of the 21st century is particularly tragic. By the time Malala was born, her father had realized his dream of founding his own school, which began with just a few pupils and mushroomed into an establishment educating more than 1,000 girls and boys. Then we can see that after the birth of Malala, his father started a school. In that school, we can see that more than 1,000 girls and boys were educated. At a very young age, Malala developed a thirst for knowledge. For years, her father, a passionate education advocate himself, ran a learning institution in the city, and school was a big part of Malala's family. She later wrote that her father told her stories about how she would toddle into classes even before she could talk and acted as if she were the teacher. Malala showed her interest in teaching when she was a baby. In 2007, when Malala was 10 years old, the situation in the Swat Valley rapidly changed for her family and community. The Taliban began to control the Swat Valley and quickly became the dominant socio-political force throughout much of northwestern Pakistan. Who is Taliban? I think many of you are very familiar with the Taliban. The Taliban is a brutal fundamentalist religious group that held power over most of Afghanistan during the late 1990s. The word Taliban comes from Talib, student in Arabic, as the group was started by Pakistani religious school students in the mid 1990s. The worst period came at the end of 2008 when the local Taliban leader Mullah Fazlullah issued a dire warning. All female education had to cease within a month or schools would suffer consequences. Malala remembers the moment well. How can they stop us going to school? It's impossible. How can they do it? But her father Ziauddin Yousafzai and his friend Ahmad Shah, who ran another school nearby, had to recognize it as a real possibility. The Taliban had always followed through on their threats. The two men discussed the situation with the local army commanders. They provided security. Girls were banned from attending school, and cultural activities like dancing and watching television were prohibited. Suicide attacks were widespread, and the group made its opposition to a proper education for girls a cornerstone of its terror campaign. By the end of 2008, the Taliban had destroyed some 400 schools. So we can see that Taliban was not at all ready to give the opportunity to be educated. That's why Taliban had destroyed more than 400 schools. Determined to go to school and with a firm belief in her right to an education, Malala stood up to the Taliban. Alongside her father, Malala quickly became a critic of their tactics. How dare the Taliban take away my basic right to education? She once said on Pakistani TV. By this time, Malala was still only 11, but well aware of how things were changing. She knew that her way of life was under threat. When a journalist from BBC Urdu asked her father about young people who might be willing to give their perspective on life under the Taliban, he suggested Malala. The result was the Diary of a Pakistani Schoolgirl, a blog for BBC Urdu in which Malala chronicled her hope to keep going to school and her fears for the future of Swat. She saw it is an opportunity. So, at the age of 11, with the support of her father, Malala started to write the blog Diary of a Pakistani Schoolgirl. Through that blog, he speaks about her hope to keep going to school. At the same time, she also shares her fears for the future of Swat. She wrote about life in the Swat Valley under Taliban rule and about her desire to go to school. Using the name Gul Makai, she described being forced to stay at home, and she questioned the motives of the Taliban. Pakistan's war with the Taliban was fast approaching, and on May 5, 2009, Malala became an internally displaced person after having been forced to leave her home and seek safety hundreds of miles away. On her return after weeks of being away from Swat, Malala once again used the media and continued her public campaign for her right to go to school. Her voice grew louder, and over the course of the next 3 years, she and her father became known throughout Pakistan for their determination to give Pakistani girls access to a free quality education. Then we can see that Malala started to give interviews. She became very famous in Pakistan. She raised her voice to give Pakistani girls access to a free quality education. Her activism resulted in a nomination for the International Children's Peace Prize in 2011. That same year, she was awarded Pakistan's National Youth Peace Prize. But not everyone supported and welcomed her campaign to bring about change in Swat. On the morning of October 9, 2012, 15-year-old Malala Yousafzai was shot by the Taliban. Seated on a bus heading home from school, Malala was talking with her friends about schoolwork. 2 members of the Taliban stopped the bus. A young bearded Talib asked for Malala by name and fired 3 shots at her. One of the bullets entered and exited her head and lodged in her shoulder. Malala was seriously wounded. That same day, she was airlifted to a Pakistani military hospital in Peshawar and 4 days later to an intensive care unit in Birmingham, England. Once she was in the United Kingdom, Malala was taken out of a medically induced coma. Though she would require multiple surgeries, including a repair of a facial nerve to fix the paralyzed left side of her face. She had suffered no major brain damage. In March 2013, after weeks of treatment and therapy, Malala was able to begin attending school in Birmingham. After her incredible recovery and return to school resulted in a global outpouring of support for Malala. On July 12, 2013, her 16th birthday, Malala visited New York and spoke at the United Nations. Later that year, she published her first book, an autobiography entitled I Am Malala, the Girl Who Stood Up for Education and was shot by the Taliban. On October 10, 2013, in acknowledgement of her work, the European Parliament awarded Malala the prestigious Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought. In 2014, through the Malala Fund, the organization she co-founded with her father, Malala traveled to Jordan to meet Syrian refugees, to Kenya to meet young female students, and finally to northern Nigeria for her 17th birthday. In Nigeria, she spoke out in support of the abducted girls who were kidnapped earlier that year by Boko Haram, a terrorist group which, like the Taliban, tries to stop girls from going to school. In October 2014, Malala, along with the Indian children's rights activist Kailash Satyarthi, was named a Nobel Peace Prize winner. At age 17, she became the youngest person to receive this prize. Accepting the award, Malala reaffirmed that this award is not just for me, it is for those forgotten children who want education. It is for those frightened children who want peace. It is for those voiceless children who want change. Today, the Malala Fund has become an organization that, through education, empowers girls to achieve their potential and become confident and strong leaders in their own countries. Funding education projects in 6 countries and working with international leaders, the Malala Fund joins with local partners to invest in innovative solutions on the ground and advocates globally for quality secondary education for all girls. Through this, we can identify Malala gives importance to girls' education. Currently residing in Birmingham, Malala is an active proponent of education as a fundamental social and economic right through the Malala Fund and with her own voice. Malala Yousafzai remains a staunch advocate for the power of education and for girls to become agents of change in their communities. I hope all of you went through the life of Malala Yousafzai. All of you please take the page number 69 in your textbook. Go through about the author. Through this chapter we are going to speak about UN speech by Malala Yousafzai on July 12, 2003. Through this speech, Malala expresses thanks to all who prayed for her fast recovery and new life. She also speaks about the significance of Malala Day. After that, she speaks about the struggle for achieving the goals of education and protecting other rights. She expresses her attitude towards the terrorist group Taliban. She also speaks about the influence of the teachings of Muhammad, Jesus Christ, Lord Buddha, philosophy of non-violence, importance of pen and books, the cruelties against Pakistani girls and female teachers. She also makes a plea for changing strategic policies. She also requests to ensure free and compulsory education for every child. She reminds to reject prejudices based on caste, creed, sect, religion, or gender. She speaks about the need of unity and knowledge as a weapon. Through this speech, she is inspiring the people to fight against illiteracy, poverty, and terrorism. We are going to start Malala's UN speech. Malala Yousafzai delivered a speech at the United Nations on her 16th birthday in 2013. It was just 9 months after being shot by the Taliban. She did not give a speech for revenge. She finds that talking about the importance of education for all people at the time of shot. In this speech, Malala highlights her focus on the education and women's rights. World leaders to change their policies, and she urges action against illiteracy, poverty, and terrorism. Malala Yousafzai, in her speech on 12th July 2013, spoke at the UN Assembly about the importance of providing free and compulsory education for all. All of you please take the page number 70 in your textbook. Malala starts her speech by expressing her gratitude to the most beneficent and the most merciful God. She begins her speech by addressing the dignitaries, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, President General Assembly Wook Jermick, UN Envoy for Global Education Mr. Gordon Brown, elders and all her sisters and brothers. We can see that Malala begins her speech by expressing her gratitude to the most generous and most merciful God. After that, she addresses the dignitaries, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, President General Assembly, WUK Germic, UN Envoy for Global Education, Mr. Gordon Brown. She also addresses all the elders, all her sisters and brothers. Who is Ban Ki-moon? It is already given here in your textbook. A South Korean diplomat who was the 8th Secretary General of the United Nations from January 2007 to December 2016. Then we are going to speak about WUK Germic, a Serbian diplomat who served as Serbia's Minister of Foreign Affairs between 2007 and 2012 and President of the 67th session of the United Nations General Assembly between September 2012 and September 2013. Gordon Brown, a British politician who was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and leader of the Labour Party from 2007 to 2010. So in her speech, she addresses all these dignitaries. She also addresses all the elders, all her sisters and brothers. We can move to the next paragraph. The initial part of her speech reflects her deep sense of love and compassion for God and the people who prayed for her fast recovery, people who sent good wish cards and gifts for her, the children who encouraged her by their innocent words, elders who strengthened her through their prayers, nurses, doctors, hospital staffs in Pakistan, and finally to the UK and the UAE government who have helped her to get better and recover her strength. After that, she started to express her love and compassion for God. She also reflects her gratitude for the people who prayed for her fast recovery, the people who sent cards and gifts for her. She also remembers the children who encouraged her by their innocent words. She also speaks about the elders who strengthened her through their prayers. She doesn't forget to say her sincere gratitude to nurses, doctors, hospital staffs in Pakistan. Finally, she also mentions the UK and the UAE government who have helped her to get better and recover her strength. Then we can move to the third paragraph. Through her speech, she expresses her wholehearted support to Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General, and Mr. Gordon, the UN Special Envoy, for their commendable initiation in the field of global education. She also expresses her sincere gratitude towards Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General, and also Mr. Gordon, the UN Special Envoy, because of their commendable initiation in the field of global education. And we can move to the next paragraph. Further, she mentions the relevance of Malala Day in her course of speech. She says, "Dear brothers and sisters, do remember one thing. Malala Day is not my day. Today is the day of every woman, every boy and every girl who have raised their voice for their rights." After that, she starts to speak about Malala Day. She also reminds them Malala Day is not her day. It is the day of every woman, every boy and every girl who have raised their voice for their rights. We can move to the next paragraph. She focuses on the cruelties of the terrorist attack in Taliban, of which she herself is a victim, reaches its zenith. When she mentions about the hundreds of human rights activists and social workers who are speaking for human rights and struggling to achieve the goals of education, peace and equality. Thousands of people who have been killed and millions of people who have been injured by the terrorists. She starts to speak about the cruelties of terrorist attack in Taliban. She also reveals that she is a victim, reaches its high point. At the same time, she also mentions the hundreds of human rights activists and social workers who are speaking for human rights and struggling to achieve the goals of education, peace and equality. She also reminds the thousands of people who have been killed and millions of people who have been injured by the terrorists. At the moment, she never forgets to speak about all the people who sacrifice their lives. I think this is enough for today's class. All of you please read the textbook well. We will continue the speech in our next class. Thank you.